Hello, this is S.K. Williams, and in December, I said I was leaving the tube of you, with the exception of holiday videos and a few things I had already scheduled. I would no longer try and participate in the comments section, and I wouldn't create any new videos. I, of course, did create a new video explaining that my computer had crashed unrelated to these events. I had to hurriedly remake some holiday videos with a new computer, not knowing if any of my data had survived. And it turned out most of it did. I only lost a few things, but I didn't get it back until after Christmas Day. Still, I wasn't trying to be dishonest with the situation. I just didn't know my computer would crash and fall apart like that. I probably should have gotten a new computer earlier, but it was an old machine and it had been through a lot. So, the situation was what it was. To be fair, I've had a hard time economically this year, so I put off getting a new computer. My mother ended up buying this one for me, actually. Still, I didn't post new comments until January. I gave it a break of 2 weeks, because I actually stopped posting new comments just ahead of Christmas in 2024. And after I returned, I was surprised and delighted because I not only left a post, but I made a long post. I decided to roll the dice and it worked. For the first time in several months to maybe even a year, I was able to post a long post, and it went through. But it was short-lived, and soon several of my other longer posts would vanish, so I'd go back to doing shorter posts. Then they would vanish, and I would go back to using the archaic spelling from the 1500s that I'm used to reading now because I'm doing the Bishop's Bible. And then those would vanish. The intelligence synthetica is still targeting me and not allowing me to have any sort of word choice, and I am not really at liberty to say what I want to say, which is a growing problem on the tube of you. I'm not usually a very political person, but I am hopeful that with the new administration we can get more fairness and justice, and the liberty to speak what we wish to speak can be restored. It's becoming ridiculous that people on the left who constantly claim that they're all about freedom and tolerance and diversity, whilst castigating people on the right as belonging to a certain party from Europe in the mid-20th century and calling them fact-ists, if you know what I mean, and followers of Charlie Chaplin. Again, I'm using a euphemism, and talk about how they're all horrible people who want an authoritarian government and stripping us of our rights, and we need to support freedom by going with the left, are the very ones that are proposing that we abolish all of those freedoms that they claim they wish to defend. After all, the left generally controls the tech platforms, like Gaggle and the Tube of You, which I am using right now. And the left in our culture is defined as secular, not religious. It is defined as wanting religion to completely remain out of public life. It is defined as being progressive and against the restrictions of traditionism, which generally translates into wanting to tear down the existing culture and reinstitute its own non-religious life stance that we must all obey. We in our culture know it's wrong to force religion down people's throats or try and force them to be religious. But for some reason, when it comes to secularism, we don't fight it with as much rigor because secularism is, by definition, neutrality toward religion. At the very least, being secular means you're not religious. And that's actually a problem. And it's been a problem for years, and I've talked about it for years. Maybe people will finally start listening. A religion is nothing more than people's beliefs. I know we like creating distinctions like saying, well, religion is different because it believes in the supernatural. Religion is different because it's about the worship of gods. But no one really objects to religion just because it's about believing a god exists. Religions are more opposed because of the moral demands they place upon us. Because of the way they tell us that we should live. Ultimately, people on the left are anti-religious because in the West, religion means Christianity, and Christianity is largely associated with the right and with conservatism. Now, I am well aware that not all Christians are right-wing. I am well aware that not all Christians are conservative. I am well aware of things like pro-gay churches. But the thing about it is, those churches only ever come up in this way when talking about it like this. When the left wants to deflect, like when being critical of them for equating all religion with Christianity and Christianity with conservatism. They'll be the first ones to bring up the left-wing churches. But read their own literature when they're not being criticized and don't need to deflect. They generally think of religion as right-wing and secularism as left-wing. They talk about this often, and it's very sloppy thinking on their part, but it is how they conceptualize it. And I'm addressing how they conceptualize it, not how I conceptualize it. Because let's face it, most people don't understand the way I conceptualize it, and don't try to, especially if they are on the left. This is particularly obvious when it comes to the atheist community, which refuses to even admit that it is left-wing because atheism, by definition, is a lack of belief in a god, and a lack of belief in a god is not a religion. A lack of belief in a god is not even an ideology or philosophy or worldview. It's just a lack of belief in a god. And if you think about it, since atheism is just a lack of belief in a god, it makes no demands on what else you can believe, so you can be as right-wing and politically as you could left. That's why atheists are so politically diverse, unlike religious people who are overwhelmingly right-wing. Of course, we know that in reality that's not true. In reality, there is no reason to think that because religion focuses on teachings of a holy book like the Bible or the Quran, that its teachings are static, and that it teaches culturally conservative views because it's the views of the past that doesn't change, which is why religious people are overwhelmingly conservative, whilst atheists can be conservative or liberal because they're making up their own mind. That's not the real world. In the real world, atheism is not a lack of belief in a god. It is a belief that there is no god. It was only defined as a lack of belief in a god in the 1970s by Anthony Flew, who redefined the word atheism from a belief there is no god to a lack of belief in a god, so that he could win debates by saying that the onus of proof rests solely on the theist, not the atheist. And now it's dogma in the atheist community that atheism is a lack of belief in a god. And they'll even combine asserting as a fact that God doesn't exist with it being a lack of belief in a God to explain why atheism is a lack of belief in a God, and explain how atheists don't have the burden of proof. They will insult you for believing in something that's obviously stupid and wrong and a delusion, while telling you they're not claiming anything. It's a pathetic bully tactic. When someone says that God doesn't exist, and you tell them that they need to supply evidence for that, and they respond, I am an atheist. That means I just lack belief in a god. I'm not making any claims. You're the one that's claiming it. Your insane claim of a fantasy creature is real. You're the one with the sole burden of proof. It's obvious that they're actually making a claim. And it's obvious that they are saying that God doesn't exist. You don't call God an insane claim of a fantasy creature, while at the same time just lacking belief and not making any claims and having no burden of proof. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because ultimately, all of the same things that the new atheist movements did to win arguments is being done by the left, which is not surprising when you realize that new atheism was never an organic movement that began by four separate writers writing on their own in isolation who happened to be interested in how religion affects and damages society, with the media doing nothing more than exposing a deep interest in this topic. The new atheism was a highly coordinated media effort, put out by very wealthy people who, surprise, surprise, happen to push progress politically. All four of the new atheists had the same literary agent, John Brockman. You can look this up. They also all four reference each other in their books. If you're reading The God Delusion, you will see references to Sam Harris and Christopher Hitchens in it. So the idea that these are people who are working wholly independently of each other is silly, especially when you realize that John Brockman also worked for the Edge Foundation, which he founded, and the Edge Foundation helped fund these books. The Edge Foundation, of course, also got money from a certain man whose name I can't use, but sounds like Jack Epstein. He had an island that people are now famous for. It had the famous temple on it. I can't be too explicit thanks to Tube of You Thanks to Tube of You deciding that misinformation, disinformation, and hate speech should be barred from the platform. That's also why I sometimes garble my speech and use odd word choices. And right now I'm talking with a gravelly voice. The simple reality is, the new atheism was never really about atheism as a lack of belief in a God. It was about proclaiming that God doesn't exist and you're an idiot for believing in God, but also telling the atheist they don't have to actually back that up with anything. The sole burden of proof lies on someone else, so you can say and do what you want. It was also about pushing socially progressive values and ideals, by telling you the only reason they are opposed is because of religion, and religion is based on faith. Faith, by definition, is belief without evidence. Even the Bible says this. The biblical definition of faith can be found in Hebrews 11:1. Faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things unseen. See, the Bible itself says faith is belief without evidence. Of course, the verse doesn't actually say faith is belief without evidence. They just take it to mean that, and if you disagree with what they say they mean, it's because you have cognitive biases, because you're a religious person, and you can't face the reality. And when confronted with what your own holy book says, a holy book you've never read because you're religious, you suffer cognitive dissonance, and you have to come up with an ad hoc argument to rationalize it, when you could just be honest and accept your holy book really does say faith is belief without evidence. Of course, that's another way they argue, is to demand you accept what they say a text means is what it actually means, and is the plain reading of the text. It's another thing that you see the left doing constantly. And let's face reality. Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, and Daniel Dennett were all left-wing politically. Although with Hitchens, people nowadays claim he went right-wing toward the end of his life. He never went right-wing. He was always a Marxist. He was always a Trotskyite. The only reason he's said to have gone right-wing is because he supported George W. Bush's war in Iraq and the war on terror. Because Bush supported it, the left hated it because they hated Bush. Because the rational left always bases its opinions on policies based on if they love or hate the person who's actually doing them. If a war is being prosecuted by a right-winger, it's a right-wing war of aggression, and the left have to oppose it. There are exceptions to this. It's hard to tell what those exceptions will be, though. You just have to get the mood of the pack, because left-wingers tend to be pack thinkers, even though they all claim to be individuals. Now, I don't think there's anything inherent about left-wing politics, though, that creates this. And I've seen the similar patterns of behavior develop in right-wing groups. But I do know that in the modern world, we're stuck with something that we're not allowed to say because it's ridiculed, as if ridiculing it proves how ridiculous it is. The left and the atheist movement, even though they're secular and not religious, are actually religious. You see, one of the problems with people having of understanding me is that we've all just accepted that some people are not religious while other people are, and religion is this other thing that's added on to humanity. And we also take it for granted that religion has always existed, and thanks to people like Tim Whitmarsh and his history of atheism, know that not everyone in the past was religious. The problem with this is that it is an entirely Eurocentric, Western-centric view that doesn't make any sense when you study the history. You see, much like how we take for granted the existence of nation-states and assume that even as in the ancient world there was this concept of a nation-state that existed, oftentimes the things we take for granted in our modern world did not actually exist historically. There was no concept of a nation-state, for example. Yeah, you had countries. You had Gauls and Romans and Greeks. But the concept of a nation-state is more than just being people with a shared culture and language. Being a nation-state means being a corporate entity with a centralized government that defines a large part of that identity in itself, that operates as a corporate existence. And the ancient world, while there were governments that governed people, never had a concept of a geographically defined, contained, centralized entity. The idea of a nation-state and a national identity that is derived from a corporate entity known as a nation is something that didn't really exist in humanity until the 1500s. And even in the 1500s was pretty confined to Europe when they started centralizing their governments. Which is odd because now we try and justify things like the Enlightenment and the revolutions as rebellions against centralized governments headed by kings who had absolute sway on everything, who held everyone else who was not a nobleman as a peasant with no rights who can be left starving. This is, of course, not really true and is a polemic designed to promote our modern mythological ideas of democracy and revolutionaries as heroes who freed us and gave us democracy. Because in the past, kings were not so absolute. Not everyone who was not a nobleman was a peasant, and not all peasants were left starving, because that would make no sense. The peasants were, after all, the workforce for the nobility, and you don't generally keep your workforce starving. The truth, of course, is that peasants actually did have rights, and not everyone was a peasant who was not part of the nobility. But we imagine we have the king, the nobles, and the peasants had no rights and were slaves and had to do whatever the nobles said, and the nobles had to do what the king said, and it's an absolute power that corrupted absolutely, and we overthrew the evil nobles, and now we're free, and that's not really the way history played out. But we also tend to project the idea of a nation-state onto that mythos, with the king being a king of a nation-state. The truth of the matter is, historically, the idea of a nation meant people, not a corporate entity. You could never leave your nation because wherever you went, your nation went with you because you're part of it. Whereas today, I can talk about leaving a nation. Like, I can visit another nation. I can go to the nation of Germany, but if I'm in the nation of Germany, I'm not in the nation of the United States of America. But that's the point. People historically didn't understand the world that way. And people historically didn't understand religion the way we do either. People historically did not separate religion from philosophy or other daily beliefs. There was no special concept of, if you have supernatural beliefs and beliefs about gods, that's a thing called religion. And they certainly didn't have the sloppy way we think about it, where if you believe in gods and the supernatural, you also believe in these morals, and look how these morals come from belief in the supernatural. That's just crazy talk. And yet it's the crazy talk that forms the basis of how we talk about things. The truth of the matter is, if people oppose same-sex marriage, they don't just oppose it because their religion says it's wrong, and they're religious, therefore they obey mindlessly their religion. And it certainly isn't true that if someone is an atheist with no religion, they support same-sex marriage because they see no logical reason to oppose it. In the real world, the reason the majority of atheists are left-wing is because they've embraced secular humanism. And even though it's now popular, thanks to people like Alex O'Connor, to reject secular humanism because secular humanism values human life over animal life, and they want to say that they value animal life equally to human life, there is actually no difference between what Alex O'Connor believes and what a secular humanist believes. We're just supposed to accept that Alex O'Connor is not a secular humanist. Therefore, we also must conclude that whatever applies to secular humanism can't apply to him, or at the very least we can't assume it does. After all, he's not a secular humanist. But it's obvious that whatever Alex O'Connor is, his beliefs came from secular humanism. He was a secular humanist before he decided animal life was equal to human life and decided to leave it. And it's not like he had such an epiphany that he fully and wholly rejected all that secular humanism believed in and came up with something new. In reality, even his belief that animals have equal merit and equal value to human life is not something that's incompatible with secular humanism. It's just something he said that we all took for some reason as a society as true, even though it's not. There have been several animal rights activists who were also secular humanists who did not value human life over animal life. So it really comes off to me as more of a stunt. And at the same time, even if I accept that to be a secular humanist is to put human life above animal life, Alex O'Connor is only not a secular humanist because of that one belief, and everything else is still secular humanist. One of the problems we have in our society is that we tend to think of things as packages, though. Like if I reject Christianity because I don't think Jesus is God, that means I must reject everything in Christianity. Well, actually, I'm wrong about that. You see, for some bizarre reason, when it comes to Christianity, we can still be infected with it since religion is a mind virus, and Christianity is a particularly nefarious mutation of the mind virus of religion. So you can still have Christian ideals without being a Christian and have to be purged of the infection. That is how it's being discussed, as if it's a pathology. But when it comes to atheism with no religion, we don't do it that way. For some reason, it's off or on, and it's ridiculous. The simple reality is, religious beliefs are nothing more than beliefs about the world we live in and how we should live in that world. Even though we like saying there's a clear distinction between philosophy and religion, there really isn't. A philosopher isn't limited to just the natural world, for example. So trying to say that religion is about believing in the supernatural and believing in gods, or at least a god and things like spirits, and philosophy isn't, and that's a dividing line, which is something I hear often, isn't actually helpful when you realize that a lot of philosophers have thought about gods and supernatural powers and spirits. By the logic that's being imposed, René Descartes was not a philosopher, but a religious thinker, because his philosophy centers heavily on belief about God and belief about what we, for some reason in our culture, call the supernatural. A term I don't really use that often, precisely because people don't know what the word means. We tend to think of things as supernatural that are actually not supernatural, like ghosts. But people don't know what the words actually mean anymore. That's why they buy into this nonsense about atheism being a lack of belief in a god. But you see, the modern atheist movement doesn't want you to think about these topics. The movement that began by promoting reason and free thought really is a movement that equates reason and free thought with coming to a predetermined conclusion. The rationalists and freethinkers always say the same things. And I don't just mean they arrive at the same broad general conclusions. I mean they quote what other atheists say. When you hear them accuse you of doing the Gish Gallop, for instance, most of the time you're not doing it. You're just showing them evidence, and they're taking individual pieces of evidence for a single argument and pretending you're trying to win by attrition by throwing out multiple arguments. I've been accused of doing the Gish Gallop a lot, even if I stay on one point. Or if they ask me for evidence to support what I'm saying. I was even accused of doing the Gish Gallop when I pointed out in a discussion where they said religion should be taxed. Tax religion! Look how they're getting involved in politics! Tax religion! Strip them of their tax-exempt status! How atheist organizations also get involved in politics and are tax-exempt, and no one complains about that. They then demanded can I name any atheist organizations that are tax-exempt? And when I named several of them, well, I was doing the Gish Gallop. Even though my objective was simply to show atheist organizations that held 501c3 tax-exempt status within the United States, and I gave a list of them, each item on the list was me trying to win by attrition by throwing out arguments without regard for how strong they were. And you see this with the atheist community a lot. But you also see it on the left. You see the same belligerence. You see them talking about the motives of the people they don't like. While at the same time, if you discuss their motives, whoa, you must think you're a mind reader. I find it hilarious. You think you know my beliefs better than I do. You can't assume people's motives. That's wrong. So they'll call out conservatives as real racists or Nahashis. And they'll talk about how their real motive is to control women. Their real motive is to get rid of foreigners because they don't like them. Their real motive is because they don't like black and brown and people of color. Their real motive. But you can't talk about their real motive because that's unfair and not logical. Go figure. The simple reality is, the modern secular world is not interested in freedom. The modern secular world is interested in getting us to conform to a certain group of beliefs and equating conformation of those beliefs with reason and free thought. The truth of the matter is, when they talk about freedom, it's just a word. To them, freedom means agreeing with us, and if you don't, you are excluded. Ironically, they also complain about religious people and conservatives for othering people and engaging in tribalism, while they themselves are open and tolerant of everyone. And yet they other people. They are the tribalists. I am not a tribalist. I don't care that they say that because I'm a Christian, I'm a tribalist, and think anyone outside of my religion is evil. I'm with a woman who's outside of my religion. I don't care about that. What I care about is being called delusional for believing in a sky fairy and being told I have to sit at the children's table, not the adult table. Because I can talk about whatever I want at the children's table, but have no effect on society. I don't want that, because my ideas are not children's table ideas. I don't care that they've been labeled religious and therefore irrational by the people at the adult table. The people at the adult table aren't having the rational, intellectual discussions they say either. They're just hurling childish insults and demanding we all believe one specific thing. And the biggest issue with the left is its ideological purity and its commitment to ideological purity, which guarantees that you will not only be unable to have actual freedom by having differences in views and perspectives, but it guarantees infighting as people who gain enough power in the left struggle against other people who have gained power in the left once they disagree. And the disagreement doesn't even have to be that severe. Because the left is not about freedom in the modern world. The left is about telling everyone what to believe to achieve their utopian vision of the future. A utopian vision that can only be brought about once everyone agrees with what it is, and once everyone is brought in line with the beliefs that are needed for the utopia. Their scientific secular utopia, however, can't come about precisely because people will disagree with what it should be, even if they're left-wingers, even if they're atheists. They all have the same vague notion of a Star Trek-like future, where everyone lives in peace and democracy and we've overcome our differences, by, of course, becoming atheistic secular humanists and giving up religion for reason. But they can't explain what that actually means, because in their minds it must mean believing all the right things. They don't understand the contradiction of saying you're free to disagree while at the same time demanding ideological purity, and at the same time their idea is based more on emotion than reason, even though they've blinded themselves to that fact by endlessly talking about being the people who support reason. As a result, they don't think through the real issues and come up with an actual workable philosophy. They just have an outline, and when a real issue confronts them and disagreement occurs, they will fight to the death over their view of it, because everything must be the utopia, everything must be perfect, and reason demands X. You don't believe X, you believe Y. Therefore, you are not really in favor of reason. And keep in mind, they're perfectly willing to force people into those behaviors. They justify it by claiming that people are all about disinformation, misinformation. And of course, they're fighting misinformation and disinformation. They're fighting hate. But listen to them talk about how other people are. They disparage the Nazis. They disparage the factists. They're the ones being hateful. Just calling people Nazis and factists. Just calling people those things, when it's obvious they aren't really those things, is hateful. It's exclusionary. And that's the problem. Platforms like this, which are largely run by Intelligence Synthetica, which is why I'm able to talk to you about this issue at all, because the issue is actually verboten, but the Intelligence Synthetica isn't sophisticated enough to actually understand what it is I'm saying if I follow unusual talking patterns. And those patterns don't even have to be that far off on normal human speech. They could actually be how a person normally talks, just not a way that the machine is programmed to think people talk. With me, I'm doing a few intentional oddities, a few intentional pauses, in the hopes that the machine doesn't quite know what it is I'm saying. But here's the thing. We've lost our freedoms. And we've lost our freedoms to a machine. We've lost our freedoms, at least on tech platforms. And we need to get them back. I'm going to make one more video about this topic. It'll be shorter. It explains something I'm going to explain here, but I don't know who's going to see this video. I'm not giving up on the tube of you, simply because I don't want to be run off. If I'm banned, I'm banned. But I'm not going to walk away. At the same time, I realize I can't really put up liberty of talking videos and actually expect them to actually go up because of the actual problems on the actual platform. They have loosened some restrictions. I don't have to talk quite so oddly anymore. Maybe they'll loosen more. But I'm not going to engage in the comments section anymore if all my comments have just vanished on me. And I'm not really going to put up new videos on commentaries. But my channel will be kept alive because I've revived an old program. Oh, I didn't revive this program because of the situation we're in. It just synergistically came together that way. I always wanted to finish this project anyway, and it will take me 3 years. And that is reading the 1568 Bishop's Bible, a Bible that, to my knowledge, no one has ever done an audio version of, and which I will be the first. I'm doing it in an animated way that seems a bit whimsical, but the purpose of the project is actually academic, since I want to preserve this piece of our history. The world doesn't really need another audio Bible, and I don't see that many people picking the Bishop's Bible of 1568 as the go-to Bible. They could, and I wouldn't have a problem with people doing that. If you want to listen to the 1568 Bishop's Bible read by me, go for it. If that's the way you want to read the Bible, if that's the way you want it understood, you want it read to you in an audio format, and you want me to be the one reading it, and you want it to be the 1568 Bishop's Bible, more power to you. I have no problem with that. I would actually appreciate it. It means I get more views, and my work is appreciated. But the purpose of the project is actually academic, which is why I open it in a very lecture hall style and then proceed to speak oddly. I make mistakes in that regard because I am someone who lives in the 21st century, but I am trying to preserve the speech patterns as they would have appeared in the 1568 Bishop's Bible itself. So, oftentimes, instead of saying servant, I'll say servant, for instance. I will actually say words differently in the 1568 Bishop's Bible than I say in real life, or that I would in a modern thing, because that would be how they were pronounced in a form of English that still had a much heavier French or German influence on it on certain terms. If I were just reading the Bishop's Bible as an audio Bible, I'd probably modernize the pronunciation some to make it a little easier to understand and a little less awkward. But I am trying to capture what the Bishop's Bible says in the language it was written in, not simply to preserve the majesty of the language like we do with the King James Bible, also known as the Authorized Version, but also for that historical connection. Even the King James Bible would have had people talking this way if it were a more historically accurate one. And I've always wanted to do this project. And I will. But here's the thing. I will be releasing, with a few exceptions if my internet goes down or something comes up. Not all the videos have been made yet, but I'm hoping to stay ahead of the curve here. But my intention is to release 3 videos on the Bishop's Bible a day, Sunday through Friday. That would be 3 chapters of the Bible. And on Saturdays, a psalm from the Great Bible Psalms, which were included in the Bishop's Bible, though the Bishop's Bible also has its own psalm translation that's different from the Great Bible. It will be read as part of the regular Bishop's Bible presentations. But therein is the point. I am going to do 1 Great Bible Psalm on Saturdays, and I am going to do 3 chapters of the Bible a day, Sunday through Friday. My channel will therefore be kept alive, and I will occasionally put up an update video, and when I create new platforms on other platforms, I will actually tell you about that too. I intend on continuing to work with Shoot of Bit. I'm going to have a video up there soon. And I intend on going to Ramble, which I, of course, can't talk about here either, because it's verboten. and I'll let you know. I may release a few videos on commentary if an event is sufficiently warranting of it. But you have to understand that even though the Tube of You is by far the largest platform in the world in terms of engagement, I'm being shadow banned and they don't like me, and I'm not even sure exactly what I did here. I think it has something to do with my decrying of political violence back when Daniel Trumpet's near unaliving happened. That's why I use weird names for people and hope that you get on to who I'm talking about. But until word liberty is actually restored, at least to a greater degree, I don't really feel like having my whole channel deleted for a reason I don't know, coming from some commissar somewhere that's running this platform. And so I'll keep my channel alive and active. Ironically, more active than it normally is. I used to put out one video a week. But at the same time, it's a project that I'm actually passionate about. It's not something I'm just doing just to show up the man. But it is going to be something that, because it's the Bible, even though the people on the platform don't care about the Bible or are even hostile to it, they'll allow it to be posted. It's somehow greenlit already. And I can keep my channel alive and active while I take a moratorium. I'm going to do one more video that explains the whole thing again in a shorter format, and one more that just explains another departure. But for right now, this is both an update and a notification that I'm just not going to do many commentaries anymore because I can't get them up and I can't get them running, and somehow they're the problem. Still, I'm going to take my leave of you now. I don't have much else really to say. So, thank you, God bless, and goodbye.